Welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. As always, if you can like and subscribe, it's always appreciated. And today I spoke to an incredibly interesting guy. His name is Geoff Jenson. And Geoff, it would appear, has been at war with various water boards since privatisation. There were so many things he and I could have got into, so many things that we could have talked about. And the best place to start is just to let him tell you himself. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Good afternoon. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you again for sticking with me. For those at home, this is the second time Geoff and I have tried to get this on, and we've surpassed all technical difficulties this time.
Thank you, David. Actually, I'm one of the Neanderthals, as you can see from my grey hair and my my appearance.
I think there's quite a few of our generation struggling to evolve.
Yes, and this is the first one I've done, so please excuse my my technical incompetence. Well, this week's news of how the water companies have offered to spend £10 billion over the next, 10 years, 20 years to solve this problem of the sewage being dumped in the sea, which has been going on for 40 years, even before privatisation. But it was privatisation that has literally stopped all work on getting rid of the problem.
Yeah.
Before privatisation, Margaret Thatcher's the chairman of the Conservative Party, Mr. McAlpine's firm, were building long sea outfalls, and we were the only country in Europe to be building long sea outfalls.
Can I just pause a second to get some clarification? Long sea outfalls, is that literally a huge long pipe into the sea that we pump raw sewage into the water?
Exactly. Untreated sewage was going out to sea as an alternative to building sewage works on land.
Yeah.
And there was 80 were proposed in the period in the 1980s, after Mrs. Thatcher got into power in 1979.
Yeah.
The parliamentary committee set up by Hugh Rossy into the Environment Committee, they set up anything into sea outfalls, and they decided they weren't suitable. Mrs. Thatcher's advisors, Slaughter and May, they found, basically because somehow or other they'd known of my invention, which would cut the cost of sewage on land sewage treatment plants, and they could be fitted either along the coast in a marina, on the quay, alongside or in the run up to in the fields or whatever it was before it got to the coast. They could be on a marina out in the coast, on a harbour, anything like that, because it's all underneath, and there was no smell, and there was everything.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the patents were stolen, and they were used by Northumbrian Water.
So I just want to back up again. Because you mentioned that you had an invention, we'll talk about what that invention is as well in a minute. But just to clarify, how much of this was cost effective, and also in the 70s, as I vaguely remember them, nobody gave a shit about, no pun intended, but nobody gave a shit about environmental causes. The way that people think about the environment today and the arguments over climate change, that wasn't going on in the 70s. The idea that you would even care about kicking shit out into the sea wasn't part of the argument. So how much of it was they just didn't care, and was it also cheaper to just build pipes out, or was it just like, no, it's none of that, it's just job for the boys?
Well, it was when they nationalised the water companies in Ted Heath's period of government between 1969, 1973, I think it was. They nationalised the water authorities.
Yeah.
And they joined all the local councils. The sewage treatment plants and the sewage systems were all run by the local councils. So something like the GLC, and before the GLC, it was it was Middlesex, Essex, county councils, for example, who had their sewage works. And you've got the ones at Essex has got one at Beckton, Kent's got them at Crossness. Middlesex had theirs at Isleworth, Mogden, and these were big sewage works. And the sewage was brought to them by sewers, obviously, but so the problem was that when the sewers were overwhelmed with rain, they had these combined storm overflows. And before privatisation, the water companies I was working with people in the water companies, and we were all working along the same lines. Yeah. And the old chaps who ran the sewage works, they understood what to do. And so they were all making sure that the sewage works was working properly. And when it became privatised, they sacked all the blokes who understood how the sewage works worked.
Yeah.
And stopped developing the processes that was being developed.
But that's the bit I'm trying to understand is how much of it was about saving money and how much of it was actually, no, they just didn't know. They didn't know and didn't care. Because there is a difference.
Oh, yeah, it was about saving money.
It was about saving money.
Yeah, when they privatised, for example, Northumbrian Water, which is the one that I've been in trouble with all the time, when they sold it off, it was sold off for £122.65 million. The Exchequer got from the sale, the shale sale, and that was in 1989. In the following year, they wrote off with the government's allowance about £350 million, I think it was. And then directors of the company reloaded the company with debt of £450 million.
Yeah.
And they then paid themselves a massive £186 per share dividend. So they literally, at the time of privatisation, the Northumbrian Water directors ripped off shareholders, and this was all done, of course, with Slaughter and May's permission, because they were the.
But that's what I'm saying is obviously, privatisation is always going to be loved by some, hated by others, right? And I'll chuck my 2 pence worth in the fact that I was a kid. So the idea that I understood the concept of what was going on is farcical. I was born in 1974. But one of the things I'm interested in, especially so that we can kind of get to what it was you invented and what was taken from you, is there's a difference between they knew, because like I said, I don't remember really anybody caring about the environment the way we do today. Back in the 70s, I don't remember. I remember vaguely in the 80s, Sting was on a campaign to save the Brazilian rainforest, because apparently that was disappearing at the rate of whales every day. And there was something, and we had to stop using certain aerosols and hairspray because of the ozone layer. But the way that they talk about the environment and conservation today was not the way it was spoken about in the 70s and the 80s. So how much of it was nobody cared?
The people who cared were the professionals. the engineers who ran the sewage works, the old chaps, as I call the old boys, whose
So
jobs
that's yeah. So that answers my
yeah,
question. So what I'm saying is,
nobody, because they've just flushed it down the loo, away it went, and that's as far as everybody cared.
yeah.
And
So
there used to be
that answers my question. Yeah, that is. It wasn't a question of they knew best. Nobody cared to start with. The people that bought the privatization of water, the water companies, that they were effectively hedge fund managers, accountants,
yeah,
whatever, and it never had anything to do with environmental policy or any kind of
they were one of,
ethos of how to make the world a better place. It
and
was
they were
how
just
can yeah, they were asset strippers, and this is a business, and we're going to turn it. This is kind of one of those things where people get involved in a business without actually knowing what the business is, and then strip it of their assets and wonder why it stops working.
I think well, the trouble was sewage treatment is not rocket science, but there's more people who understand rocket science than sewage treatment.
That's
And this
probably
is the
true. Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
And, it's not very, people will look at the way the thing went to the moon and went to the moon and think that was wonderful, but they don't care about the sewage. They don't care about that.
yeah,
And funny enough, when I was that year we went to the moon, I went to Sweden, and as I was waiting to get on the ferry from Helsingør to Helsingborg, I looked over the side and there was just a stream of turds and shit going out into the Sound.
yeah.
Now that was stopped. That was 1968 the year, and they then themselves. That's when they start that country, Denmark and Sweden on the other side of the Sound. They were building sewage works,
Yeah.
rather than pumping the sewage untreated into the sea.
So just
So that
explain
was
to
that. Was,
people
that
what you mean when you say sewage works.
a sewage works is a sewage treatment works. So in other words, all the sewage comes in from domestic sewage, plus rainwater, plus industrial effluent waste, and it goes into a system where it's biologically treated. And there's two different methods of doing it, basically. And one is the filter bed that you see beside the railway line, where it goes round, round, and round, and the stuff trickles through. That's aeration, biofiltration. Prior to that, they have a settlement tank, and then they have another settlement tank afterwards to let it all settle out. And the other system is activated sludge, where all the stuff comes into a big tank. They just blow air into it for 12 hours roughly, and then let it settle out again. And some of the sludge is pumped back to the beginning to keep it going. So they were invented about the end of the 1900s. The first one was the biofiltration system. That was invented about 1880, and the activated sludge was about 1910.
What is activated sludge?
Well, it's a process where you just bring the sewage in, mix it with the sludge that's come from the end, and the sludge that's come from the end is basically biomass. It's bugs that swim around, and these bugs, they oxidize the carbon first in the form of sugar. It's the basic form that they can oxidize, and then it goes to oxidize the ammonia, which comes from the urine. So you have loads of bacteria, different sorts of bacteria, and they vary from not virus size almost, amoeba type things, if you ever remember them from biology lessons, to rotifers, which get bigger and bigger, into tiny worms, which you can almost identify under a microscope as worms. But the filter bed, you can actually see the literal earthworms because they're in air, but earthworms can't swim very well.
Yeah, of course. No, they don't.
So the filter bed is a good source. If you're a fisherman, a biological filter bed was always a good source of earthworms for fishing. So if you keep up with the thing going round, you're all right.
Yeah. So that was your sort of standard sewage treatment plant, which they
that was what I did was worked out that if you combine the two systems together, you get the advantages of both. And it would halve the power consumption of an activated sludge plant and double the double the effectiveness of the biofiltration plant by getting rid of sludge. So you get rid of the sludge. But the main advantage of it was you got rid of the ammonia. And it's the ammonia that's the problem in sewage treatment, because the ammonia kills the fish at very low doses, especially in warm water, like the River Thames, for example. There's a reason why salmon can't go up the Thames anymore, is because there's so much ammonia comes in from the sewage works that Crossness, Beckton, and Mogden, that salmon and sea trout and those sort of fish can't get up. Although they tried several times to reseed some of the rivers, they were very good salmon rivers. And before, I suppose before the Great Sink happened in 1857, and they put this thing, there used to be an awful lot of salmon in the Thames.
Yeah.
And it used to be a regular food for poor people. So we have destroyed a good salmon river, basically, and it could be reinstated. I have a concept which is called the London Green Route, where you, instead of having combined stormed overflows going into this giant cesspool which they're building at the moment, you have alongside each bank of them a series of sewage treatment plants underneath a new, slightly wider embankment on both sides, and it can be used for cycling along. And if you look at www London Green Route, you'll find the website. And that's what I spent the last 5, 6, 7 years. I started 2015, because when I heard about the Thames Tideway Tunnel, I realised straight away it was going to be a problem. And I tried to persuade initially Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, because it was related to they had to get the money for it. They got an exemption from the European Union, because they were giving state aid to a private company in the shape of Thames Water.
Yes.
So they got this state aid, and Thames Water at the time roamed in the Cayman Islands. And Thames Water had been, when it was privatised, it was first privatised to the people, then it was quite quickly sold off to a German firm, and they sold it on to an Australian firm called Macquarie. And it was, I think, it was a German firm, or it might have been Macquarie, when they first mooted the Thames Tideway Tunnel. And basically, it was a tax evasion scheme that went wrong, because the way that Thames avoided paying tax was that they borrowed money from their Cayman Islands company, which they were going to invest to offset their. So they loaded the company up with debt and put the money through the Cayman Islands. So they got these banks, which was, and the whole thing was, this whole thing with sewage going into the sea is all about disjointed financial systems. It's all done as a sort of smoke and mirrors, I suppose you'd call it.
Yeah. So why do consecutive governments keep voting against changing? Because we just had one recently with the Conservatives last year, and they voted against cleaning up the water.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not the first time that's happened, and it's happened with various governments.
So, well, I'm not going to accuse Tony Blair.
But that's what I'm trying to understand is
it was the Thames Tideway Tunnel was first mooted, but it was under Margaret Thatcher. Was the privatisation of water.
Yeah, but the problem with that argument now is it's nearly 40 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I'm trying to understand is, so like I said, I'm not trying to excuse them. I'm not, right? But what I'm trying to understand is, you're talking like 1979, so it's 89, 99, so that it's 30 odd years ago, wasn't it? No, 40. Yeah, it was 40. Just over
1989 was privatised. Yeah, it's 40 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at that, that's 40 years ago. And as a general rule of thumb, nobody gave a shit about what the planet was doing in
Well,
1979. It wasn't the industry it is today. So what I'm
no,
trying to understand is when we are where we are today and we're investing billions, if not trillions, into electric cars, toxic batteries and everything else, and we have much simpler solutions right on our doorstep for cleaner water, why the fuck are
yeah.
they not doing it? Is what I'm trying to get to.
So, I mean, I've asked myself this many times, and I have to say, it's the people at the top are corrupt.
Okay,
Um,
I'll accept that.
and
I don't know any of them, so I don't know anyone to defend.
let's go back to the 2019 election. Um, Jeremy Corbyn and his exchequer, John McDonnell, wanted to re-nationalise water, didn't they? They want to re-nationalise water, electricity, railway, and everything else, and that's all been dropped by Sir Keir Starmer. So you have to wonder what's happened to Sir Keir Starmer. Drop what was a very popular system, even going back to the previous time when Ed Miliband, he wanted to re-nationalise water because they were getting a lot of stick from people complaining about sewage going into rivers. And I
This is
did a
this is a
survey
bit I don't understand is why we're still today in 2023 pumping crap out into the water. Do you know what I mean? Because, and why politicians, if you know, because I know recently, I think it was either last year or the year before, it was voted through in Parliament when they tried to push through a bill to clean up the water.
There's a sign on the bridge in between the library and the Maltings, which says something like John Glenn voted for dumping sewage into rivers.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen that sign. Yeah. So for people that are listening, this is a sign over the River Avon in Salisbury that points out the MP for Salisbury, John Glenn, voted against a bill that was being pushed through Parliament to clean up the water. And that's important to the River Avon because it's a chalk stream river, which is wonderful, crystal clear, and lovely trout.
The Wessex water plants at Ratfin and Amesbury, there's a problem there, and there's been a mayfly crash on the Avon, which is the stalk stream, and it's very important that that's sorted out because when what people don't understand, it's not the fact that the river's polluted for a short period and the rain comes and washes it all away again. It goes down the river. Say the pollution stops. But these repeated pollutions, what happens is that the bed of the river becomes enriched by phosphate, nitrate, and organic material, which blinds the gravel in the river, in the chalk streams. And in a chalk stream, the water comes up from underneath. And when the water can't come up from underneath, to clean this river up, the little fish fry and the larvae of the flies, they can't get their oxygen. They rely on it's this oxygen that's coming up with the water from underneath. And the chalk streams are a very fragile environment. Fergal Sharkey's a great advocate of this. He's a keen fisherman.
He is. Yeah. And
also, another person was Jeremy Paxman. He went on about Southern water polluting a river down in, I don't know which river it was. But not long ago, he was very, very prone. And I think Southern Water got fined £100 million. And that was really, Jeremy Paxman probably would try to avoid the fact that he influenced it. But he knows the rich and powerful, and he knew which one to phone up and say, "Look, yeah, you've got to do something about this." And if you don't, I'll get you on the telly and give you a good dogging, so to speak. So it's about people like Fergal Sharkey, who's got a profile. There's a chap who did the the program Fishing with his mate Bob. Is it? I can't remember. Bob Mortimer, is it?
Yeah. Reeves and Mortimer fame. Yeah.
Reeves and Mortimer, but not Reeves. It's
Bob
Bob
Mortimer.
Mortimer
Yeah.
and another comedian. They did those fishing programs, but
yeah,
they also did one on streams being polluted, and it's this sort of thing that's getting people noticed. But the technology's been there for 40 years to solve the problem. I did it, but because it was stolen from me.
So let's get into that then. What is it that you invented?
Well, what I invented was I was working at Clarchester, these firm that made the septic tanks. We went on to start making sewage treatment plants, and we used a process called the biodisc, disc, which is a rotating disc, half in the sewage, half out of it. And the problem was that the plants, if it was fed sewage from a septic tank, it went through the plant in a very short space of time, because the way that small plants they get very peaky flows. Yeah. And it was just washing all the sewage through, going into the final plant, and all the stuff was coming up, and sludge was coming to the surface, which is called rising sludge. And then the water going out was very high in ammonia. And so we were losing, we were getting complaints from Water Authority. This was a plant in the yard, one of their own plants. And I got ONC chemistry, Ordinary National Certificate in Chemistry. So I knew a little bit about it. I went to a thing about septic sewage, and they talked about septic sewage. And there was somebody there, I think a Water Authority guy, who still runs, I think, something high up in one of the water companies. But he wrote quite a good paper, and it explained nitrification and denitrification. And so I worked out that if you recirculate the sludge and mostly the water, which contains nitrate now, which is a very good source of oxygen, send that back to the beginning, that gets rid of the septicity. And so then bring it back through the plant, there's no septicity, and the sewage gets treated very well. And just keep on doing this. And I recently built a plant in Mustique. The first plant I built for 26 years was in Mustique, because I was banished by Robin Jacob case, a judge in the Patents High Court. I was blacklisted from working because I had this £200,000 cost order on me. So I was blacklisted from working, and the industry itself has been blacklisting me because I'm not of the right sort, shall we say. I don't run trouser leg up and shake hands in the fashion.
So how was it? Because you patented this, didn't you?
Yes, I patented it. Yes, indeed. I applied for a patent.
Yeah.
But before I could get the patent through to grant, the company that we'd licensed it to, the director of the company, his brother-in-law was a patent agent, and they must have had a discussion. He said, I've got a very good invention here. And the patent agent said, my brother is going to become part of Northumbrian Water. And when it gets privatised, and it'd be very nice for that company to have. And so he explained, and this is a big problem with the English patent system. The English patent system is the inventor has no control over what happens to the patent once the patent agent if he's a corrupt patent agent, he can take it away from the patent, because the inventor doesn't have to sign any papers. Now, that law doesn't apply in Europe. So in Europe, the patent and the inventor has to sign all the papers on the invention. So when there's a license given to somebody, he has to sign a paper. If it's just the patent's assigned to somebody else, he has to sign the documents. And England,
so just to clarify, so then in the UK, they don't have to be able to prove they invented it.
No, they don't have to. What happens in the UK, the inventor has no right to how the patent is used. So once the patent, if say I was the employer has all the control of the patent. If an inventor is employed by the company, the inventor has no control over that patent. The patent belongs to, same as the Dyson employs somebody to invent something.
But I mean that's kind of familiar wherever you go in the world. That if you work for a company and you're the designer for the company, anything you design is their property.
Yeah. Now, when what happened was my staff at Clarkson, my product development staff, were sacked by somebody who also rolled his trouser legs up. They were all sacked on his instruction, and I was really annoyed. And so I decided, well, I've got this really good idea. I'm going to go and do it by myself. But it was just impossible. It was too big for me, basically. And so we licensed it to Entech. And the managing director of Entech decided it was such a good idea, he'd like to set up a tax evasion scheme using my patents. And
this is the bit I'm trying to understand. The bit I'm trying to understand is, at what point did you hold the actual? So you applied for the patent.
Yeah, personally, I applied for the patent myself. I went to see a patent agent in Letchworth, it was.
Yeah.
And we wrote
the point where you were then double crossed?
No, that's not the problem. I had the patent, but my backers, they owned 45% of. I only had 45% of this company, but the patent, my backers who had formed a company just to develop this patent. So the patent belonged to me until I signed it to the company, but it was never assigned to company. So the patent belonged to me when the director of the company decided to stop paying my backers for using it, and he wanted the patent. He decided that he had the patent to do with it what he wanted, and his brother-in-law became the person who was going to do the deed, because the patent agent could then. And so another patent agent. It was transferred from my patent agent, and I was forced into doing it. And I didn't actually sign any documents or anything, so they had to forge documents to get this patent transferred. Right. And eventually it was the method was used by Northumbrian Water. And I've got all, this
you went to court. You showed me all of that paperwork when we met at the pub.
Yeah.
So for those who are not aware, the bridge in the Woodfords has a working example of Geoff's design.
Yeah, it's been there since 1989. About 1989. Yeah. Funny enough, I was talking to the lady about doing some servicing work on it this week on Wednesday. I had lunch there again, and Lorna, the lady who owns it, and I have been discussing improving it, because she thinks it needs. She's got more customers now, and it's quite popular, and she would like it. It's been there for 33 years, 34 years.
How many houses? Do you know how many houses it services?
Well, it services the pub, and I think there's about 6 or 8 houses in that little bit of the village.
Yeah,
it services, but it's the number of people who visit the pub every day. I mean, she's got a very good.
Thousands of people go through there every year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Lorna was telling me she sells 300 meals regularly on a Saturday. No, that's, but I don't know. That's the day and the evening.
I think that's probably fair. I mean, you and I have been there plenty of times. You and I had lunch there, and we've been there separately plenty of times. And if you go to the bridge in the Woodfords on a sunny day with the beer garden by the wonderful chalk stream river, they probably do go for at least 100 people an afternoon, at least.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, and they've no problem, probably if not 300. It's a busy pub. It's a busy pub. So
busy pub, yeah. And it's open on a Sunday, for example. You've got families come there 12 o'clock, and they're there all afternoon.
So yeah, it's probably not unreasonable to say, it services quite a few for 1,000 people every year.
And the sewage coming out of there, I've got some results from it, and the ammonia level is 0.009. Well, the normal parts per million. The normal allowed level is up to 10 parts per million, but that always assumes that the river is going to have 8 times the flow of the sewage works coming out. So in other words, it gets diluted down to below 1, because one.
I was just going to say, is to give people a visual in their own mind. If they were to look at this, what would they be seeing?
Well, the concept of my plant is that it should all be below ground or below. You shouldn't see anything because it's not open top tank. I mean, this is the big disadvantage of the activated sludge plants. You've got all these open tanks, and during COVID, there is a risk of the aerosol that comes off the aeration tanks. If you studied the COVID, various COVID, there was sort of like a map done of COVID and how the places were getting more and more COVID and where it started from. Well, the Kent variant, you could see it started from near Beckton or Crossness. I can't remember which one it was, but like Crossness, because it was obviously on the Kent side river. But you could actually sort of track it down towards the Dover, literally along to the Kent variant was being spread there. The very first COVID, I think was transmitted from London Airport. London Airport sewage goes into Mogden. In fact, when you're flying out of
but that's most. I think most people will accept that COVID, the initial transmissions came from the airport, because it's just how it gets into any country, isn't it? And then, if you've got one person walking through Heathrow coughing and spluttering with any virus, they're potentially going to potentially infect 1,000 people before they get to the doors.
But it's well known. It's well known that in the SARS epidemic, that COVID was being transmitted in Hong Kong through the sewage system, the ventilation system from the sewers in a block of flats.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. But that's what I mean, because that's why I'm asking people for the visual, because most people won't understand how these things work, because I'm lucky. I've met you and I've sat down, looked at the diagrams, looked at the pictures, looked at websites with you. I've seen all the documentation from Parliament and MPs and solicitors. So I've seen all of this. So, but in terms of a visual, most people don't understand what that you're talking about, like an open top tank with a flow system through it, where sludge. Am I correct? Sludge goes to the bottom. Some of it's recirculated, but the clean water goes over the top, and it's that creates the high nitrates and low ammonia.
Yeah, but by keeping it all underground, you can have it literally underground. The system can be literally underground. You could. I built one in Mustique a year ago, and literally the system is inside. It's only about. It's like a raised bed, basically. Yeah. It's about sort of up to knee height, I suppose. And the rest of it's below ground level. And then they got plants growing out the side and plant on the top, and so you can't. So all the sewage that in the plant it's got about 6 or 8 inches of earth before any vapor or any aerosol that is going to be trapped before it gets out. And so you don't even and the smells, if there are smells, they're all held back in the earth. Naturally by natural biological reaction. And so the sewage treatment, if you think about it in the past, it's natural soil bacteria. And so when you've got small populations well spread out, it's perfectly acceptable to treat the sewage in the land.
Yeah.
I mean, that is how it was originally done. They used to call them sewage farms. And the Chinese and Indians, they have these people who take out what they call night soil, and they put it out onto the land, and that's how it was done before they invented the sewage. It was
Because
taken
I've
out
seen
at night.
systems. I don't know if it's the same, but I've seen systems where it's a series of 3 or 4 ponds, one after the
Yeah.
other, and
Oh,
by the
yeah.
time you get to the last pond, it's clean water.
Yeah, acid. Yeah, they're oxidation ponds. They only work when there's temperatures high enough to get the bacteria working right. So
Yeah.
it has to be above 30 degrees C. But the problem with those, of course, is then you've got mosquitoes, so you get dengue and
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that. So that's why you don't want that system. I mean, that's why I couldn't put that system in Mustique, because they get dengue there. And in fact, the name for Mustique is Mosquito Island originally.
Oh,
And
nice.
so that they turned it. And when Lord Glenconner, whatever his name was, Colin Tennant, went over there, he changed the name to Mustique. But
So
and there's literally no ponds. There's no water, no surface water on the island because of this dengue. But on St Vincent, which is where the natives live, the ex-slaves or the children of slaves or descendants of slaves live, they've got water, and of course dengue is a problem. People do get dengue and die of dengue.
yeah, of course. Um, just I'm just conscious of our time. So if you were to go, if you were able to ask people to do something like contact their local MPs or look at a website, it's how would you suggest that people raise awareness to this? Because public pressure can win through, but only if
Oh
the
yeah.
public knows.
Well, the thing at the moment, I think there is we are on top of this from the point of view of public pressure. There's been so much public pressure come on in the last few months and well, yeah. I mean, this thing like the sign over the River Avon with John Glenn's name on it. It's probably a bit unfair on John, but
Yeah, he wasn't the only
it's
MP that voted against it.
he wasn't the only one though, and he was whipped, and he would have lost his job if he voted
Yeah,
against it. So it wasn't. It's not fair on John to blame him as the only one, but it's unfortunate that if you're in a party at the MP, he has to follow the party line. Otherwise, especially loses his job, as you think he was in the Treasury at the time. So yeah, so yes, but that's the thing. It is very much on the thing. It was on television on Channel 4 yesterday. It was on BBC radio, on the Today programme. There was Jill Plymouth from the Financial Times was talking to Sarah Montague on the World at One yesterday. And Jill Plymouth is very, very knowledgeable on this whole thing from the Financial Times on the problems which has been caused by privatisation, the way that the water companies have just extracted huge amounts of dividends rather than investing it in doing it. And this is basically the whole, that's going back to the whole problem. If we spent the money in 1989 doing the work, we wouldn't have this problem now.
no, but the thing with that is we do have the problem, and
Yeah.
1989 is never going to come back. So
No, we don't.
so who
We don't.
should who should who should people look up to get involved? Because like you say, there is more awareness, but one of the things that people can find difficult is actually who they should look up, who they should support, and who they should join. So who would you
Well,
suggest people look up?
well, the thing is, I mean, I'm not going to really advocate political parties, but
No,
the
no, but
one
like
party that,
you just mentioned that lady on World at One.
yeah,
What other groups or campaigners are out there?
Well, the World at One is the Sarah Montague and also the Today program. I'm quite close. Quite close to them. They I've been writing to them for well an awful long time, and they do they do help me. So and it's getting through to journalists, and journalists in several papers now have been taking this on, and literally it's if it's a politician, if it's a local authority elections, or if they're national elections, it's obviously the politicians. But both parties, the Labour and the Conservative Party, at the moment, don't seem to be willing to do anything about it because of their people who are backing them financially.
But that's always going to be the problem, unless you can put public pressure on them, because all MPs, regardless of what people think of MPs, and maybe there's a debate about their integrity, the one thing that they are very loyal to is the risk of losing their seat. And regardless of what comes down from the whip, if they're going to lose their seat, they'll vote in the right direction.
Yeah, and there are MPs who do vote against the whip. I mean, the classic was Jeremy Corbyn was always voting against the Tony Blair government.
Yeah, so, what happened to him? So.
You see, obviously the people who supported Tony Blair shafted him and shafted Jeremy Corbyn, and so this is the problem, that in politics you don't know who to support, who to go to, and I think it's supporting people like there's the Surfers Against Sewage, there's the Windrush campaign in Oxford. Surfers Against Sewage is a much more natural campaign. There's some ladies groups in Leeds, swimmers, cold water swimmers. Right. There's people who swim off beaches in Exeter. And these are the people we've got to really
get behind,
applaud,
and
get behind. And if you know a local river that's being polluted, and it's very difficult to get information because, like fishermen, for example, you get a fisherman. I was told about Amesbury sewage work by a friend of mine who happens to be a fisherman, and he said to me, "Can you go and see the people at the Salisbury District Angling Club and talk to them?" And it's that sort of thing. It's the angling clubs on the rivers, the people who swim in the rivers, people who go paddle boarding and that sort of thing, sailors. And and I mean, there must be some sailors in Parliament whose boats are bobbing around with turds around them when they're in certain
places. I think there be a suggestion that would they know the difference? and on that note, it's probably the correct place to end. Thank you very much. I do appreciate your time today.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope I haven't upset any people.